Good afternoon. My name is Nate Lackman. I am a lawyer with the law firm of Foley & Lardner. I'm the chair of our telemedicine and digital health team. And it's my pleasure to be the moderator for this session on international telemedicine arrangements. We have two really good speakers with us today who are quite experienced in this space, Dr. David Burt and Dale Vandemark. And I wanted to give each of them in turn a moment to introduce themselves and their backgrounds. Certainly their full bio is in the conference app, as well as their contact information.
Well, I don't know if we need to use the speaker here, the microphone, but so by trade and training, I'm a car wreck doc. I work in the ER at the University of Virginia. And over a bit of time, I've had two interests evolve. One is the use of telemedicine in a lot of different areas. And the other is global health, and in this case, centered in the Altiplanos regions of Highland, Guatemala. And working with folks at the University of Virginia Office of Telemedicine have synchronized some of those efforts. And it might be interesting today to use Highland, Guatemala in part as a foil as we talk about telemedicine extended into global environments.
Thanks. Dale?
If I can use this, is this on? Yeah, okay, good. Good afternoon, my name is Dale Vandemark. I'm a partner with McDermott, Will & Emery, which is an international law firm. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. office. I'm a part of our digital health practice as well as our larger health industry advisory practice. Over the past, I would say 15 years or so, I've worked increasingly in the international sector when it comes to healthcare delivery. So a lot of my colleagues in the life sciences practice will represent life sciences companies internationally in drug development, manufacturing, those sorts of things. But I've been very interested in the delivery of care across borders, call it. So for about 15 years, I've been working in that area. It comes to medical tourism, all the way through now these advanced telemedicine systems. So I've worked with a lot of different types of healthcare companies, primarily though hospitals and health systems, in expanding their services outside of the United States, and frequently with the use of telemedicine and other technology. That's also included some pro bono engagements with humanitarian groups that are working outside of the United States to deliver care, but predominantly with U.S.-based academic medical centers.
Great. So we have a doctor and a lawyer. We just need what, like an undertaker maybe to complete the trio? Quick show of hands. Who's here from the provider side? Right? Okay. Who's here from like an entrepreneur, non-provider side? Okay. What about a technology company? Okay. Yeah, I know they're not mutually exclusive. Okay. What about like the government? Ooh. Okay. What Oh, excellent.
State of Delaware Health and Social Services Department.
Okay.
Office of Rural Health.
Rural health.
Work in a VA, does that count?
Counts with me. You probably hit all the boxes: technology, provider, government. Okay. Open question real quick. Why are you guys here? We're just kind of interested. I know audiences are cold in the beginning. Just feel free to share with us what you wanted to learn, why you're even here today at 4.
Sure. So my name's Annette. I'm a pediatric cardiologist in Northern Virginia. And my family happens to be from Ghana as well. And it always is, which is in West Africa. And it's always been a goal of mine to perhaps one day, go to Ghana, train someone to do echocardiograms. They only have one pediatric cardiologist in the whole country. And that trained person with the echo images have it transmitted here to the United States to have, a group of cardiologists read it or help out in some way. So I'm interested in, knowing how to facilitate that, what's involved, what do I need to think about, laws, things like that.
Excellent.
My plan is to take the Aurora Healthcare platform overseas, and I'm trying to find out what the barriers to entry are, what the challenges, and any success stories.
We won't talk about any of that today. I'm sorry.
There are no barriers. It's just easy.
I'm Rebecca Bates. I run a free clinic in Northern Virginia, and most of my patients are from Muslim majority countries. So I'm really interested in facilitating additional care to
Pre-consults abroad to then come to the United States.
Frank Sykes, I'm from Thomas Jefferson in Philadelphia. We're approached quite frequently from, a host of different people looking to connect from our base out someplace or someplace looking for some type of expertise and services in. And, we've shied away from it for a good long while because we just can't get any real clear direction on the path forward, where we mitigate our risks as best as we can. Not necessarily, it's one thing to obliviously, fly through life of how our laws are here in the United States, but then to understanding how it's governed in other countries and what we are then responsible for. And then, oh, by the way, what does our physicians need to do in order to be able to practice in those other said, goodness knows whatever countries.
Great, so maybe B2B contracts between your US-based hospital and a medical organization abroad, outside the US, yeah? Including licensure, and we'll talk about that. Many countries don't have a peer-to-peer consultation exception to licensure like we do in the States, and so what you would need to do is build it outside what they would consider the definition of practicing medicine in some respects. Who's next? Yes.
In Delaware, we have a coalition of 140 healthcare and nonprofit organizations, and we have a structure of our coalition that provides education to all these folks. So I'm here to get as much information as I can and share that with the coalition about international telemedicine, because that's been on my radar and some folks in our coalition.
Okay.
So I'm with CHKD, and we have a procedure that was developed at CHKD that's known for a particular condition. It's called the NUS procedure, and so we get requests from different countries around the world for a consult, and we just wanted to make sure we weren't doing anything improper in providing medical advice to them. So it's less of us reaching out to try to solicit business and more just because of their familiarity with our expertise that they're contacting us.
Yeah, don't you do training in specific? I remember we spoke a couple years ago at Matrix about that particular niche that you're very well. Oh, nice.
So I hope someday I'm curious, I know there are people who offer mental health or telecounseling to missionaries, families, others, by English limits as far as foreign language might mean, wouldn't be everybody, but in different cultures.
I love it. Okay, so that would also potentially include, as a broader spectrum of delivering telehealth-based services to U.S. citizens, English-speaking patients who are abroad temporarily, long-term, right? So maybe you're not targeting the purported patient, but you're targeting their caregivers or employees of U.S.-based companies who are stationed outside the U.S., but who want that kind of cultural and medical familiarity, okay? I hope you gentlemen are taking some extensive notes. Yes, who's next?
Hi, my name is Sharon Ivings, and the three of us were actually graduate nursing students at the University of Virginia. And most of our study as graduate students has focused on conducting research in rural Honduras and Nicaragua, where we're actually testing the feasibility and connectivity with colposcopy in some of those areas, and we're actually conducting interviews with some of the providers and nursing professionals in those areas. So a lot of our work has been geared towards international telehealth and research. I don't know if you guys can add anything, but so we're open and we're just excited to be here and get into all of that.
I love it. So transnational research studies, some of the ethical implications, like we have a lot of IRB rules and stuff within the U.S. How would that apply if you're working with a population that's overseas? And then would it be appropriate if their rules are, let's say, a lot more lax than your particular U.S.-based medical institution to kind of pick a forum, do what you want to people who live there, and then publish that within the U.S. or globally? Certainly data as well as privacy. There's some.
Sorry, one more use case since we have an international attorney. Clinicians that immigrated to the U.S., there is a long process for them to get credential here. Some may choose, some choose not to. What are the legal implications for them to be able to provide teleconsult back in their country as a clinician that is licensed there?
That's a great question.
Anyone else? Well, this is great. This gives us a lot of fodder. Look, you clearly recognize that there are international issues I think it's only going to get bigger as we see over the next 5 years. Within hospital systems in the U.S., there's always been an appetite for international program development. Largely, it's mostly been how do we get people who live overseas to come to our hospital as destination medicine and pay like a cash price for whatever particular expertise we offer, right? That's really just one little niche here in a broader scope of opportunity and potential services you can deliver. But we are seeing that continue to grow. I also think that historically there may have been a lack of the same type of level of compliance oversight that hospitals applied to their domestic operations as when applied to their international sort of operations. And I'm sure we'll hear from Dale about some of the compliance issues that you'll want to think about for international services. But it's not going away. Even in the direct-to-consumer space, I don't know, did anyone read how last week Teladoc expanded into Canada, right? And prior to that, they acquired Advanced Medical, which was essentially an international version of Teladoc. So they're making plays to have acquisitions to get larger and larger and cover a global task force. And so in terms of the handouts also, the one thing, Dale has a copy of it in front of him, if you want to show it. Within the app, you can download, it's a white paper about international telemedicine issues, so both medical and legal. And with that, we'll take it away.
I was wondering if I could add 2 questions to your very good list. Number one is, how many of you could see yourself actually going to another country to be involved in an evolving telehealth collaboration? Are you okay, great. And then secondly, in a selfish mode, which means sustainable, maybe write down 2 things that you as an individual feel that you would get if in the future you had an opportunity to involve going to another country to help develop a telemedicine mediated collaboration. So what's your return on investment for that? Not just your system or your business, but you personally, what's in it for you?
Is that a question?
It is. What's in it for you?
Well, I'm on the board of directors of a nonprofit that provides services to Haiti, so part of Haiti. And it's our mission, it's our outreach to provide a number of services. And so I guess it would meet the mission of the organization. That's why we support a primary care clinic and community health workers, midwives. And so if we could add telehealth to that, it would significantly expand outreach and quality of the healthcare.
Great. So we'll start with our first speaker, Dale Vandermark. And Dale's going to talk about some of the legal and business strategic implications. And then when we switch to David, he's going to talk about some of the clinical and operational decision points. And feel free.
Do you want me to come up there?
Yeah, that'd be great. I don't have to stand the whole time. Thank you, Dale.
Do you have the... Okay. Do you like our new logo? That's brand new, actually. 2018, 19 rather. Good stuff. Okay, so I'm going to talk about legal and regulatory issues primarily, but as Nate suggested, I'll also touch on strategic issues, some business issues. And I guess the first point I thought to make in terms of the legal issues, from our perspective in the United States, looking outside of the United States, what I think you should think about is that it really is the same set of issues you deal with in the United States. It's just in a different jurisdiction with a different set of particular rules, right? So when you're looking at another jurisdiction, it's going to have laws, regulations that relate to the practice of medicine, that relate to the privacy of data, that relate to liability, that relate to how organizations work together or don't work together, right? All of those issues are going to exist just as they exist in the United States. It's just that you're going to get a little bit of a different spin on them, right? So a different jurisdiction is going to have a different approach to those issues. Now, fortunately, when you are dealing with something like healthcare, a lot of the concepts that we bring with us, the legal and regulatory concepts we bring with us, we find in existence outside of the United States as well. So there's at least a familiarity, right, between the issues we deal with in the United States legally and the issues we deal with outside of the United States. But it's those differences, of course, that can make or break a program from a compliance perspective, can create legal risk, or create problems for you. So the way I always think about it is that when you're looking outside of the United States, you're thinking about that legal and regulatory structure. It's that great phrase I learned in Thailand many years ago. It's same but different, right? Now, from a legal and regulatory perspective, coming from the United States, we also have to deal with some cross-border regulations, right? Anytime a company in the United States looks outside of the borders and does business outside of the United States, there's a completely different set of laws and regulations that we need to be thinking about. I'm not going to talk about all of them. Many of them are not really applicable in the healthcare setting. But it's important to be aware that not only are we dealing with all the regular healthcare issues, but we now also have to be thinking about things like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and other sorts of cross-border laws and regulations. So in addition to the regular stuff, we got to think about some new stuff as well. So I'm not going to go through the slide. I'm not going to talk about these jurisdictions in particular. You can take a look at them. But what I want to do is talk about how some jurisdictions approach some of what we do in slightly different ways, and in particular in the context of telemedicine. And I am going to talk a bit about China because China has a really interesting regulatory model. And in addition, China is a really interesting jurisdiction to begin with. Okay? Now, in China, something that a lot of people don't realize, when physicians get licensed, their license is actually tied to a facility. So if you get licensed to practice medicine in China, you practice medicine at that facility or associated with that facility, and you don't get to go out and hang a shingle. You don't get to go out and practice medicine somewhere else. You're really tied to a facility. And in fact, the healthcare delivery system in China is very much focused on this facility-based kind of view of the world, right? Hospitals are even more important in China than they are in the United States. And so when you think about healthcare delivery in China, you really generally think first about hospitals, and you don't think about doctors, and you don't think about clinics. Now, that's a broad generalization. There are clinics, there are employer-based clinics, there are all sorts of things like that. But the focus in China is really facility-based. And because of that, or perhaps as an attribute of that, when it comes to telemedicine, telemedicine in China can only be delivered via an institution that has a telemedicine license. Okay? Other jurisdictions, this is true as well. So from a United States perspective, in looking at that market and understanding that dynamic, automatically an entire business model kind of goes away, right? That as a U.S. healthcare provider, there is no such thing as a direct-to-consumer market in China. Can't do it. It's illegal because your telemedicine services have to be delivered through a facility that is licensed to deliver telemedicine services in China. And those are only healthcare institutions in China. So you want to get into the Chinese market, you want to deliver telemedicine services, it has to be through a partner, an organization in China that has a license to deliver that care. That's a very kind of a unique sort of a market.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Question. When you say the institution has to have a license, is that the originating site in China where the patient is that has to have the license, or an institution in the United
So an institution in the United States that is just in the United States can't get a license to deliver telemedicine services in China. So when we talk about the institution having the telemedicine license, it's an institution in China, a healthcare institution in China that has a license to provide telemedicine services. In that parlance, it's not the originating site necessarily in the way that you think it's the distant site, right? It's where the telemedicine services are being provided from, not where they're being provided to, right? So the telemedicine institution in China is what's providing the telemedicine services. It isn't the location of the patient. Is that clear?
So in our view, that would be the provider site, the distance site
Right.
provider site.
Right.
But if we were providing services to there from the United States,
You'd be providing it through the telemedicine licensed provider in China, in
and
partnership.
then they would send it to wherever the patient is.
Essentially,
We become
yeah.
an affiliate of that institution.
Right, exactly. Okay, so now the second thing I want to say about the Chinese market, and this is going to be particular to China, but there are variations of this in just about every other jurisdiction. The Chinese business market generally, and this includes healthcare, is very political, right? So things can change very quickly in China based on factors that we in the United States don't normally associate with as factors that can impact a business, right? So in China, another way to think about it is that the rule of law is very political, right? It's very politicized. Whereas in the United States, the rule of law tends to be the rule of the law. It is what it is, right? And the political decisions generally don't impact the law. In China, it's actually just the opposite. So one of the challenges in doing business in China is making sure, both on the front end, but also over a period of time, you're working with the right partner, right? If you're working with a partner in China that falls out of political favor, you may suddenly be working with somebody who's about to go to jail, right? And that creates a lot of problems. You need to unwind your project and disassociate yourself from that project. So China's a really great example of how the legal environment and regulatory environment can be very different from a healthcare perspective, and also just how the environment itself can be very different from just a doing business perspective. Okay. I'm not going to talk about Germany. I'm not going to talk about Abu Dhabi or anywhere else. So I talked about some of those cross-border laws that we need to be cognizant about. I'm really just going to talk briefly about two of them. One is the FCPA. It's the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And the other is the Material Support Statute, which is actually two statutes. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is a fairly unique bit of legislation that we passed in the United States in the 1970s. I think that the only other jurisdiction that has comparable legislation is the United Kingdom. I could be wrong about that now. I think perhaps some other European nations are starting to develop their own versions. It's a law that prohibits U.S. companies essentially from bribing foreign officials to get business, right, or to maintain business. It was very controversial when it was enacted, and it has remained somewhat controversial. A lot of U.S. business really didn't like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act because they felt that it undermined American businesses' ability to do business in other parts of the world where, quite frankly, bribery is an ordinary course of business. And in fact, that you could make the argument that that is true. Nonetheless, it is the law. It has been applied in just about every industry that has gone global over the years, and that includes the healthcare and life sciences industry. In fact, in recent years, the enforcers of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which include the Department of Justice, have identified healthcare and the life sciences sectors as ones in which they are going to be looking closely for violations. And over the past few years, a lot of life sciences companies have been found guilty of violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So it is an area where the government is looking. Now, in terms of healthcare companies, we divvy up the healthcare life sciences world that way. For the healthcare delivery, there have been investigations. There haven't been public settlements as far as I know, but there have been investigations. And of course, people have done internal investigations of themselves and unwound transactions over the years. But I don't think that the healthcare industry can consider itself shielded from government investigation in this area, even though there hasn't been a ton of activity. I think it's just a matter of when the government shows up, not a matter of if it shows up. Now, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is particularly tricky for U.S. healthcare because in many jurisdictions outside of the United States, healthcare is delivered via government agencies. And so one of the primary components and one of the primary requirements for a violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is paying a bribe to a foreign official, right? So if you're in a private industry, you really can't violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act if your partner is also in a private industry. But if you're dealing with a government agency, as a lot of healthcare companies do when they look outside of the United States, they're dealing with a government agency. And in many parts of the world, as I said before, bribery is common, it's customary, it's somewhat expected, and it is sometimes difficult to do business without engaging in that kind of conduct. And I'm just here to say, don't. It's very bad for you if you do. I won't go into details as to how the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act works, but you should be aware that number one, charitable organizations with charitable missions are not exempt from the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Just because you're doing good doesn't mean that you can't violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Number two, like many laws we deal with in the healthcare industry, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act gets very complicated very quickly when it comes to definitions of core principles as to what constitutes an inappropriate payment, what constitutes a government official. These things can get very tricky and dicey. One of the things as well that you need to be cognizant of, or you should be cognizant of when it comes to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, is that some jurisdictions are more dangerous than others. And fortunately, the State Department will tell you which jurisdictions are actually more dangerous than others. And let you know if you're going to a jurisdiction, you can see whether this is a jurisdiction you know the Department of Justice is going to be thinking about or focused on. The other bit of legislation I think everybody should be aware of is the material support statute. Came out of the, I can't believe I've forgotten it now. What is it, the Patriot Act that was passed right after the terrorist attacks. The material support statute is actually two statutes, prohibits anybody from providing material support to a terrorist enterprise or a terrorist organization or individual. Sounds pretty straightforward and simple on its face, but it actually really, again, isn't. The material support statute has been interpreted very broadly by the Department of Justice as well as by the courts. And I think emblematic of that was a prosecution of a humanitarian organization that was trying to teach nonviolent dispute resolution in the Middle East and working with partnership organizations in the Middle East, one of which had a member of the board of directors that was formerly within Hezbollah. And the Department of Justice prosecuted the organization. It was all fine and good. The prosecution went forward. It gives you a sense of how broad the statute can be interpreted. Yeah, question.
Is there a clearinghouse where you can check that your local partner is not either terrorist organization is not supporting the board members or not, it'd be nice to have a clearinghouse saying, hey, we checked this, now we can partner with them.
So you can get, you can do a check against a pretty good list. So something else that happened right after the terrorist attacks was the signing of an executive order, the number of which I've forgotten, which listed all of the known terrorist organizations. In addition, the Office of Foreign Asset Control in the State Department includes its own list of people that they don't want people to do business with. Those lists are searchable, and there are private organizations that will help do those searches, although if you go online, you can kind of do them rudimentarily yourself. Unfortunately, they're just lists of what people know at any particular time. And you may not know, for example, when those lists get updated, right? And so you may not know, you may do a check today, may not be particularly valuable 6 months from now, right? In terms of the organization or the person that you're dealing with. But it does go to kind of my primary advice with any organization looking to do business of any sort outside of the United States, which is front-end diligence, right? Before you go and start working with somebody else, do your diligence on that organization, on those individuals. There are private companies in the United States that will help you do background checks, that will help you run those searches on those lists, on those sites, give you assessments of those countries in terms of their risk when it comes to things like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, but also risks when it comes to something not listed here. The Material Support Statute talks about doing business with terrorists, but you also have to worry about doing business with organized crime outside of the United States for other reasons. So front-end diligence from my perspective, and then continual diligence over time is very important, particularly if you're working in some, we call them more risky areas. So the Middle East, as a general matter, is considered more risky area. China, just because of the political circumstances, certainly parts of South and Central Asia. Those are jurisdictions where there's a lot more risk. And so that diligence, both front end and then continually after that on a regular basis, is very, very important. The second piece of advice is take compliance seriously when it comes to looking outside of the United States. So if you're a healthcare institution, you know you have a pretty significant compliance infrastructure that works on a daily basis to make sure that you don't get in trouble. You need the same thing when it comes to working outside of the United States. You may not need exactly the same thing, and you certainly won't have the reimbursement type compliance oversight that you have in the United States, but you need to be thinking about things like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, but also how U.S. healthcare laws may be implicated by some of what you do overseas. So take compliance seriously. It means having the right oversight. It means doing the training, right? All that good stuff. And finally, if you're entering into a long-term relationship, or any sort of relationship actually, make sure you have an exit strategy, right? That you know you can get out of the relationship fairly quickly if you have a problem with one of these bits of legislation, right? And mitigate your risk by being able to end that relationship quickly. So I think I've taken up my allotted 10 or 15 minutes, so I'm going to stop. Any final questions before I hand it over to the next speaker? Okay. You're up.
Thank you, Dale. Dr. Burt?
Wherever you go and do whatever you're going to do, having a partner who can help you navigate, ultimately, which can be a rate limiter to your desire to do good, aka compliance, so that you know the rules, regs, and requirements, is really important. So I'm going to offer just a little bit of an overview of what UVA does in Guatemala. Very quick. If you have any questions beyond this, feel free to write my cell phone number, which I'll give to you right now. It's area code 616-340-5373. Or you can email me at davidrburt, DAVIDRBURT, @virginia.edu. So feel free to use but not abuse those. Anybody here been to Guatemala? Anybody ever desire to go back to Guatemala? Anybody here been to Latin America? Sure. Any of you been involved in a healthcare encounter here in the States with a Latin American patient where you found that your limitation in Spanish or in understanding their culture was maybe a hindrance to giving them the care that they might have gotten if you both shared a common shared language and culture? So remember earlier I asked you why you might consider engaging in a global health telemedicine encounter. And I firmly believe that one of the benefits to us in the States is by going somewhere with them and they teaching us, then we all become we. And it's like an aquifer. Sometimes it lets you recharge from some of the challenges that you have to go through here if you just want to offer good care. So with that in mind, let's talk about Guatemala. This is Guatemala. It's a very beautiful place. It's full of mountains, it's full of wonderful people, but it's also home to some of the lowest socioeconomic indices in Latin America. The rich have a lot, the poor have virtually nothing, and the middle class is vanishingly small. But yet it's only on the other side of Mexico. It's 3 hours from Dulles. And so UVA, we have a small collaboration which is between the University of Virginia and various partners in Guatemala. And we have a mission statement. And we try and hold to this mission statement. In terms of this, you can say, where would telemedicine help us develop better, more mutually beneficial and more sustainable relationships, regardless of what we're doing that's health associated in Guatemala. And that's kind of thinking outside the box is when I talk about telemedicine, I'm really saying, where is telemedicine or telecollaboration or teleconnectivity able to help you do a better job in your global environment? So one, I would say, it lets you do more good, and it lets you learn more skills. So we'll come back to that. Number two is teleconnectivity. Good, solid teleconnectivity lets you eliminate or minimize smoke signaling. Anybody know what smoke signaling is? So say you're doing a collaboration, and I'm over here, and I send you some information, and it drifts to you on the other side in Guatemala. You will get some of that, and then you'll do something, and then you'll smoke signal me back. And over time, whether I travel there occasionally or you travel here, we have a phone call or two, that's not very efficient partnership. But just imagine if you could conquer all the other barriers and hit a couple of buttons, and now there's you and a screen and your partner in Highland, Guatemala, ready to talk today's business, whatever that business might be. Not long-term, delayed, but now we're talking real-time, face-to-face discussion. So, in order to do that, here's our official motto, Semper Gumbi, always flexible. Anybody here feel like that is a key to telemedicine as well? You gotta be flexible because what you know to be true today is not true tomorrow. And something that always comes back is that in this process of partnership, we talk a lot about cultural humility, but I would say to you that telemedicine is a potent tool to help us produce from cultural humility what you might term cultural agility. What does that mean? Anybody here have a thought about what cultural agility is? All answers are good answers.
Be able to adapt to different cultures.
Absolutely. I'm a farm boy from North Dakota. It's really cold up there. I will never be a native Guatemalan, but if I listen enough and I study Spanish enough so I can hold conversations, at some point I will be culturally agile enough to jump in and partner with Guatemalans and understand their culture, just like I have to do Friday night in the ER with Guatemalans that visit us here. So telemedicine, that real-time connectivity, that minimizing smoke signaling, takes away reasons that you can't have a deeper global partnership with your partner somewhere on the other side of the border. So here's Guatemala. It's the size of Ohio, it has 32 different volcanoes, a whole bunch of different ecological zones, 20 plus Mayan languages, plus Spanish, plus a smattering of English. So it's a tough place to do business as an English-only speaker. One would argue it'd be pretty challenging. And if you want to make the wheel whirl, it's got to be balanced. And so early on, because I'm a public employee of you, who lives here in Virginia? Right? You guys probably all, for the most part, pay taxes. So you're paying me to be a public employee. So one could say you really don't have an interest in paying me to develop programs to do good by Guatemalans. Right? That's not the role of the Virginia government. But what if we were able to develop collaborative programs that were good for our students, good for our residents, good for our faculty, and allowed them to be better global citizens? Would you support me working on that? That would be a good use of tax dollars. So finding projects in Guatemala that serve Virginians through UVA and partnering them with Guatemalan stakeholders then makes that wheel spin. So as you think about teleconnectivity and global health, think about sustainability and say, what's at work here that could provide benefits to us after the novelty of the launch goes away? You know how that goes, right? A lot of hurrah around rocket launches, big flash for the boosters, you get escape velocity, and then there's a little rocket to power you to Mars, but no one cares at that point, right? That's how global collaborations, they launch with pizzazz. They get a big boost early on by 1 or 2 successes, and then most of them get derailed by comets, plasma, hitting asteroids. Telemedicine can help mitigate that. And of course, this is the background of why the more of us that go to places like Guatemala and learn from Guatemalans about themselves, this is why we need to do this so that we can be better caregivers. How many, where you live right now, have the highest, what's your largest growing minority?
Guatemala.
Guatemalans, actually.
Yeah, Dutch, Purdue, and some chicken production in Sussex County, Delaware.
So learning from Guatemalans how to take care of them when they're here, pretty interesting. And so from the UVA side, we have students can go and do research. We have small trips for faculty that can go and partner with UVA faculty. Who's more flexible, a student or a faculty member? I'm not going to answer. Language, who here, ¿qué personas habla español? Bien español. Suficiente por una conversación con sus pacientes. So all of us would wish to learn better Spanish at some point. And if telemedicine can help us do that, that'd be good. How many of you would like to participate potentially in direct patient care in a global health environment? Or weigh in on somebody whose life moving forward would benefit a great deal from your intersection, like Pete's cardiology, right? Guatemala, adobe huts, lots of assassin bugs, Chagas disease, goes on and on. So I'd love to have a Pete's cardiologist that could read, store, and forward echoes in the right setting, stuff like that. So knowing your partners, hear what you can bring and what you can bring, that's really important what he said about understanding your partner and what you can bring. And here's some of the stuff that goes into orientation. And here's my team. These are folks that work for the UVA Guatemala Initiative. And you know what they appreciate most at the end of the day? Beyond accolades, beyond jobs well done, you know what they appreciate the most? A salary. So they can go and buy clothing for their children. They can send their children to school. And so no collaboration globally really can get going and be sustainable unless you're prepared to put some money into salary. And I put this up there because salary for these folks somehow has to get down to them. So think about global collaboration and what are you prepared to put into it. And also, as we talked about earlier in the conference, when you have some autonomy, when you have shared leadership and you're not just working for the dollar, does that make you more or less satisfied if you have autonomy and can see downstream outcomes? Do you know what autonomy is to Felipa? It's when we put a telemedicine portal in her office near that beautiful lake. So she can talk to our director in Xela, Guatemala, and they can talk to me at the same time. And I care enough about what Felipa says to minimize that smoke signal to get rid of the middlemen. And so setting up a telemedicine system where part of it is to let you communicate and talk with your in-country folks is a huge statement on their value, their importance, and what their contribution is. Does that make sense? So that's not a telemedicine benefit that's maybe been talked about, but putting a portal of entry in a system into your network to let her talk to me. She said that was one of the biggest statements of parity of ownership, and I would pass that on to you. That's what telemedicine, that's what Charles and the team at UVA has taught us. And of course, down here it says, okay, so we have a team. What's in it for Guatemala? So here's some of the things that we work on. So we have a biosand water filter project where we have about 400 families each day drink from biosand filters. So when they don't have to buy the water and they can believe us that it's pure, guess what else they get to buy more of that day? Food. It's not whether I'm going to buy bottled water or food, it's whether I'm going to buy clean water or food. Or CBD. So those of you that work with Latino populations here in the United States, or have worked with Native American communities, what's their innate susceptibility to cardiovascular disasters like stroke, heart attack, and so forth? So in Guatemala, as more sugar reaches every village and tuk-tuks make life easier, what do you think is happening to the burden of chronic disease? And in a system that can't even take care of its acute needs, who's going to care for folks coming in with a stroke? Who's going to teach and guide rehab? Endless ways which telemedicine can help us help systems grapple with emerging disease burdens that they don't even realize they have. Or women's reproductive health. What's the greatest killer of women in Latin America and in Guatemala? Cervical cancer, yeah. Why do they get cervical cancer? They get screened. Husbands go away to the city, have relationships, come back to small communities, have relationships with their wife. The wives don't have access to information to make informed choices. They don't have access to a pap smear. They get cervical dysplasia, it's not picked up. Then their belly swells up sometime later, and now they have untreatable cancer. So education to the Mayan communities of Guatemala could be an opportunity where telemedicine, and indeed some of the folks in the back of the room have helped us design a curriculum of women's reproductive health education. Or how many of you grapple with EMRs? EMRs built for the system on the backs of the real-time clinician, right? How many of you have worn out your hands charting on EMRs like Epic, Subair? So one of the greatest things that telemedicine has helped us do is the project planning in real time necessary to develop an EMR platform suitable for resource-limited emergency departments. And finally, how can you integrate students into ongoing research collaborations? And telemedicine can help you do that. They can have project planning meetings with Dorian and Roberto and Felipa. And so all of these things involve face-to-face when I can't be in person, for example. So that's how we work in Guatemala. Lots of stuff going on. Direct patient care, research, students, faculty traveling back and forth. Wherever we can, we ask the question, will technology of telemedicine, which I call a high-quality, on-demand, 95% chance of working at that time connection, help us? right, so that's a little intro to our work in Guatemala. A critical question, and that comes back to who is your partner? Because in order to put a footprint in a place like Guatemala or China or anywhere, you have to know the system, but you also have to have some steady, reliable, trusted partners who can help you broker introductions, who can provide that security. Like I was talking to someone earlier, and I said, how do the Latino communities that you work with know that you're not going to turn them into immigration? And she said, I don't have anything written anywhere. I'm not that slow, but everybody knows that if you get services through us, with us, it will never reach the ears of people that could deport you. It's common community knowledge. So the criticalness of having known partners who can help broker introductions into local communities or can vouch for your partnership. And then when things go bad, because things always go bad, the ability to just keep coming at it relentlessly, eventually people will see that you're there for the duration, not there for just the exaltation of, we had a launch of some cool thing and then it died off.
Can I just add
Please.
one?
Yeah.
I think that's a great point, and it's something that actually Nate and I were talking about in a slightly different context. But in terms of barrier to entry to another country, I think those comments are spot on. You need to understand the market well enough to understand whether what you are selling is something that people will buy, right? And I use sell and buy in a very broad sort of a way. But a lot of our assumptions about what may be valuable to somebody here in the United States may not apply in another jurisdiction because of the infrastructure and the way that the service is otherwise provided. And I think focusing in on that very early on and thinking about entering another market is critical to figuring out whether you're going to have a sustainable and successful effort.
We've heard that many times, and it's so critical. Your partners they'll rarely get you into trouble, and they can often get you out. So one of our partners in Guatemala is the Hospital Nacional de Totonicapan. Anybody ever been to Totonicapan? It's in the Altiplanos of Guatemala. It has about 500,000 people. 98% of them speak Quiche. None of them speak English. And this was a hospital built in 1978 with U.S. funds as a counterbalance to all the other stuff that you're probably aware was happening in Guatemala at the time, the conflict and the death squads and the genocide and all of that stuff. But this was a place designed to heal people. But when the U.S. government pulled out, in a sense, out of Guatemala and the infrastructure support funds left, guess what was left behind? Infrastructure support. No paint, no new equipment, no bandages, no haloflane, nothing. So it's a public health system of Guatemala. And they're a partner. They're one of many partners that we have. We don't have a big office. We just have a group of folks that float around and form partnerships. It's really like telemedicine, where you might be here and you have a small physical footprint, but you're working with lots of partners and patients, right? And so this is Totonicapan. It's kind of in the center of Guatemala. Here is the municipality. It's a very fascinating place. And it's a hospital. It has all kinds of things going on, just like hospitals here. They have so many births at this hospital that sometimes you will go in and there will be 2 women in labor in the same bed. Guatemala is a young population, lots of children being born. And so here's the C's of telehealth. And this is pretty simplistic, but this is how I operate. Telehealth, and you should write this down, can help you anytime you want to have a conversation with somebody in Guatemala. If you can do it over telehealth, you can do it better one-to-one. You can do the consults, which we think about in telemedicine as what we're here, as a direct-to-consumer or direct-to-the-institution with the patient being there. If you wanted to hold a project planning meeting with a small group of folks, you could do that. You can hold education conferences. anything that is a conversation that involves your partnership, telemedicine can allow you to do it better. So, these are the future physicians of Guatemala. This gentleman up top is Dr. James Moak. He's one of my partners as our ultrasound guru. He goes to Guatemala each summer to teach face-to-face. Anybody here an ultrasonographer? Anybody do something with your hands that you can learn about, but in the end you just have to be there to teach somebody? Yes. So here's a benefit of telemedicine. What if you had a really good connection, and I'm here with a model and an ultrasound machine, and over here in Totonicapan, those 6 students are with a model and a machine, and the only thing between us is a really good connection. Could I teach and mentor the basics of ultrasound over telemedicine? Yeah. That's one of the things we're working on, telemedicine-mediated ultrasound education. And that is a huge benefit. That's been one of the biggest home runs, and it's something that we never thought about when we first started working in Guatemala. Telemedicine-mediated ultrasound education, teaching ER docs how to use point-of-care ultrasound when you can't be there. Now, legally, he's thinking potential huge quagmire. Absolutely. So now this is where this becomes in, because what if I'm here in the United States and they say, hey, we're teaching, but all of a sudden we have a sick patient in the emergency department and they're hypotensive, and can you help us proctor a fast exam? So the fast exam is the focused abdominal scan and trauma, and we go in there and fast this person, and they've got a positive fast, which usually means trauma, blood in the abdomen. Okay. And then they go to the ER, to the OR, and during their surgery, they incidentally nick an artery, and the patient bleeds to death. Possible? It is. Now, what happens if then they said, oh, based on your exam, Dr. Burt, we took this patient to the OR, and they bled to death? Unlikely? Yes. Possible? Yes. So what is the line between teaching, advising, and direct patient care? It blurs, doesn't it? When I have the ability to be there, then I'm not quite in the United States practicing, I'm not quite in Guatemala, but it's a hybrid. So real life, on-demand, tactical telemedicine raises the question of, when you get good enough to be there in real time, what is your legal and ethical responsibility? Because it would be, ethically to me, it would be unfortunate if I couldn't participate in the FAST exam, because I do them here and they help save lives and they're good, but it's totally different over the shoulder here. So this is Dr. Salamea. He's from Ecuador. He's a world-famous trauma surgeon. They invited him to come to the Totonicapan area to do a conference. And his planning for the conference and his ability to set up the lecture that they needed, they did over telemedicine. Made him a better lecturer. This is Dr. Max Luna, one of our cardiologists. He is from Guatemala. He works at UVA. He's giving a lecture on practical echocardiography. Most of these folks have visited UVA one day, a number of years ago. They still partner with us on telemedicine-mediated outcomes and so forth. Here's a list of what the hospital wants. They want a blood bank. They want emergency room transitions and stuff. UVA can't help with a lot of this. I'm in the public domain of educating UVA-itos. So what's a uva in Spanish? What's an uva? A grape. So all the students that come from UVA are uvitos, little grapes. So that's the term. We have more uvitos coming that can partner, right? But here's some of the things that we can partner with them on. So the EMR, ultrasound training bomberos. We have a program where I show them stuff on the video net, and they thumbs up if they want me to send it, and thumbs down. It's kind of like Home Shopping's network. Doing education sessions, talking among leaders. All of these involve telemedicine connections. And these are the thoughts I'll leave you with. These are statements that you may not agree with. No salary means no progress. If you are thinking of starting something in a global environment and you don't have money budgeted out for some reasonably savvy tech person to work at least 1 year on your idea before giving up, it will not work. So you should think about that. 2 is telemedicine encounters minimize smoke signaling. There is now no reason that you can't have real-time conversations with your partners in these countries. And if now the limitation is you don't speak the same language, then that's in your domain to do something about it. Tactical telemedicine is this reference to it's got to be super easy, super lean, incredibly redundant. Plan with human-centered design in mind or design thinking. Anybody familiar with that terminology? So it means plan with people, but not about them. And then, what are you doing? Define your task. And remember this, is that what happens in a relationship when you're always giving? What's that? You burn out, and what happens to the power differential between the giver and the getter? Imbalance. So with telemedicine, you have an opportunity to, from the beginning, make this an exchange of mutualism and say, hey, I'm coming to bother you, but would you let us work this system out? Could you teach us about your culture? What ways could they help you? And that gets back to that question, what would you as an individual want? So it's really important is what's in it for you that you can be unashamed to say, we want out of this, because that lets them be partners, right? Not just takers. And that's really important in resource-limited environments where they can't give what you can, right? All right, that's it.
So let me hit you with a couple of questions and get your hot take, maybe a 1-point answer, right? So we can maybe do 10 questions or so back and forth. This would be for Dale. So David talked about how telemedicine is more than just a linear, hey, doctor doing a consult to a patient, right? Talked about all these different things that UVA does. Dale, you do a lot of work with sort of digital health, like software-specific companies. Could you give us an example of maybe a company, you don't have to name names, but an example that using technology, health technology in connection with humanitarian efforts?
Sure. So that's a great question. There's so much need out there, and there are so many organizations doing so many good things. But one that I found out about just about a little over a year ago, someone I know in Dubai who has a technology company decided to design a medical record that's workable on a smartphone and to deploy it in refugee camps in Syria. Because what he found from doctors that he knew who would go to these places and treat patients is that there was no medical history really to speak of. It was just people remember what happened the last time they saw a doctor or they didn't. But what he also realized that everybody has a smartphone. And so the goal is to deploy the technology out so that people can at least keep some rudimentary medical records about their own health, so that in those infrequent times that they are seeing a doctor, they have some record there that they can work with the doctor with. I thought it was a great idea. It was something that I'd never even come close to thinking about. So when I heard it, it kind of blew my socks off.
That's a great example. I mean, it's amazing for some areas of the world. I mean, it's not anything new to everyone here, but some areas of the world with healthcare, all they're really not needing a lot to make a big difference. My friend's a dermatologist in Manhattan. Most of the time he spends, working with men and women who just want to look younger and better, right, and have plenty of money to pay for it. But 2 weeks out of the year, he goes to refugee camps, and he says, what does everybody really need? Vaseline, right, or the petroleum jelly off-brand, right? They're walking 5 miles barefoot, he says, just to see a doctor. All they really need, in many cases, to make a big difference is petroleum jelly. So
can I add?
Kind of interesting.
Can
Yes.
I add one more? Just one more quick thought about this. In the United States, healthcare is compared to the rest of the world, a fairly limited and focused industry, and we tend not to necessarily think about. And Dr. Burke, you mentioned this in some of what you were talking about, that broader spectrum of what constitutes healthcare. And another great organization I'll just point to is one that provides solar lamps in African villages, actually allows women to become entrepreneurs with the lamps. And it has that kind of ripple effect where the lamps allow people to not have to burn these horrible stoves, right, to create light in the evening, which cuts down on the internal pollution within the home. Also frees up time because you're not going out and collecting firewood to do other things. And the introduction of these lamps into the household can have a tremendous impact economically on the family, but also a tremendous impact on their health. And so it's not always those things that we would think of as being more obvious in terms of healthcare, but it's those other sanitation, right? Those other things that can have a tremendous impact in certain communities.
Dr. Burt, okay. One of the questions we had, interest in transnational research studies. So I'm not sure, the question, have you done research studies in connection with your Guatemala efforts? And B, from your UVA institution, how did you approach it from the ethics perspective?
Great question. So ethics and legality sometimes are miscible and sometimes they're very different and sometimes you can't figure out one versus the other. But so one is research in a foreign country. You should look at them as any other, what you might term in medical research as a disadvantaged or at-risk population. So people, prisoners or people of low income or socioeconomic status have extra safeguards in place so we don't take advantage of them and replicate like the Tuskegee experiments, correct? So doing research in Guatemala, for example, we had to make sure very, very carefully that we were doing everything by the book of UVA and finding out exactly what the parallel book would be in Guatemala and following that. And then going beyond that and saying, yes, we're legal in both places, but are we ethical? So one thing we did was we were looking at cardiovascular risk factors in Mayan communities. And one of the things was getting women to be okay with us measuring body circumference at their waist. But women in Guatemala and the highlands, to take your huipile off, those many layers that you wear, in order to get measured, is really a culturally problematic thing. So we actually had to go and measure a bunch of women with huipiles on and come up with an adaptive factor so that we could measure around the top and say, okay, with the huipile, we figure that this is going to add 4 inches to your circumference. So we wouldn't have had to have done that. It would have been completely legal on both books, but knowing who our partner was, and Felipa told us, we did the ethical thing as well. So again, knowing your partner, especially before trying to engage in any type of research, is profoundly critical because you can get into hot water so quickly, especially given the sensitivities of U.S. companies going and doing research on foreign populations. And then it happens and it's hidden and everyone talks and it's just, that's a loaded question, yeah, but it can be done with partner.
Dale, and I know you could give an entire half-day session on it, but let's get your one talking point or bit of advice on pre-consults to drive destination medicine. So we had a question, hey, we are the country's best expert in X or Y, and we're getting hit up by patients overseas who may ultimately fly to the United States for treatment or operation. What's one of your thoughts on that pre-consult kind of a concept?
So I think it's I'll say two things. One, it's a growing phenomenon, and I think that for institutions that provide not just a very good quality service, but a fairly unique service, should continue to expect to see their services sought after domestically and internationally. There is a lot to say. The one thing, what I would say is make sure to think about those consults in the context of the entire care continuum that you would expect that patient to go through. And if you do that, you will think about things like making sure you have enough data to say whatever it is you're going to say, making sure you're communicating back to local providers the things that they need to know in order for that patient to be appropriately cared for. And make sure, and again, if you think about it in that broader continuum of care, use a bit of common sense, I think you avoid a lot of potential problems.
And I might add to that, if you're thinking, in my opinion, a direct-to-consumer international one is a lot easier to launch than a proper B2B international arrangement, but that direct-to-consumer represents a significantly higher level of risk, okay? It's very unlikely you're gonna have enough doctors who are licensed in the countries where the patients are located, et cetera, et cetera. On a B2B model, like the ones Dale was talking about, in whether it was in the UAE or China, you actually have an opportunity to work with your partner and sculpt out the who's doing what, who's responsible for what, and in case anyone ever gets in trouble, like, you can say, here, respective authorities, here's the contract, right? And odds are you're gonna put much of the compliance onus on the local partner. Dr. Burt, we had someone with a question saying, hey, what if I also wanted to travel abroad, do some services while overseas? With your Guatemala work at UVA, have you ever had some of your doctors request that? And if so, did the Guatemala or UVA, authorities require something additional of the folks who are going in country as to the ones who are just doing it virtually while remaining in Virginia?
Correct, so that would be U.S. providers who want to go and
Right,
render
someone
care.
on your team who might want to do on-site work, not just telemedicine.
Great question. So that depends a great deal on the country. So there are some countries, for example, in Africa, where if you want to practice medicine there, you have to send in your license, send in a licensing fee, wait a long time, and then whether or not they'll accept your licensure so you can go and work there for a week is a coin toss. For example, in Guatemala, if you're working with a recognized entity or a nonprofit who you're contributing service to, the Guatemalan government doesn't require your license ahead of time. They don't require you to be licensed in Guatemala. So it's easier for foreign physicians and healthcare workers to travel to Guatemala and render care. Personally, I wish it was a little bit harder to get there, because if you make it a little harder and some people don't go, then perhaps they weren't ready to go, right? So some stepping stones are variables according to the country.
And you're probably thinking, wow, this is really hard. It's a lot of work. It can be, but there are solutions, right? Any of your respective institutions, you could do these things. I guess one bit of advice I might recommend is, it's hard to find, but seek out local counsel in country, okay? They will know, and like not just a regular lawyer, but the lawyer is going to know primarily medical licensure and some of the regulatory stuff. They can advise you. They can also then give like a written opinion upon which your university or your hospital can rely if something goes sideways. You say, no, I didn't just make it up or work with our, some like law student, but like we got an in-country lawyer. And what's also really surprising is, particularly if you're a US-based like hospital or a larger institution with some name recognition, the ability to get like an imprimatur from the government, just basically stamp of approval. Oh yeah, I know your doctors aren't licensed. I know XYZ. We're going to allow this anyhow, particularly in some UAE and South American countries. It's possible, which is really interesting, and something that you can then get comfortable not only learning and knowing the laws like Dr. Burt had to do with his operation, but if there's something that actually represents a barrier, you're able to get the government's approval and say, you know what, you guys are awesome. We want this for the folks who live in our country, and we're going to help you make it happen. Any closing comments from either of you gentlemen?
A couple of thoughts. If you're interested in going to a different culture, however you go, put some sweat equity into learning about that country, the culture, and learning the language to function in the country. And if it's not your current language, learn the rudiments of it. And you can do this online. You can do it in a million ways. Number two, there's three specialties that really seem to be relevant in resource-limited environments. And they're not potentially intuitive, but I'll give you these three. One is pathology. The ability to have someone look at slides and say cancerous versus non-cancerous is so far the realm of what people look for. Pathology is one. Two, dermatology. The poorer the country, the more the dermatologists there have to have paying patients to survive. But Guatemala, close to the equator, high altitude, people are outside all the time. Skin disease is just, dermatology is an undiscovered country. And the third, how many of you are in mental health professions? Mental health resources in these countries is so low as to be literally non-existent. So mental health, capacity building, dermatology, and pathology are three areas where I can see the U.S. via telemedicine providing huge patient care and system building potential.
So I'd say that legal structures around the world are not only different substantively, but they are enforced differently. And it is something that needs to go into your risk mitigation efforts calculations, right? So you may know, for example, that there is no law that deals directly with certain activity in jurisdiction X, but it's probably, given everything that you know, probably not not something that would be legal. But you also may be told by local counsel, and by the way, I advocate working with local counsel as well, that, you know what, this stuff is just never enforced, so don't worry about it. Your U.S. lawyer is going to just die with that sort of a response, because that's just not something that we're used to contending with, right? That you don't have that situation all that much in the United States. But you have to recognize that that dynamic is one that you find outside of the United States quite a bit. And as an organization, you need to make decisions about how much tolerance your organization has with respect to those sorts of risks, those things that you can't easily quantify. And it isn't an easy thing to do. Don't expect it to be an easy thing to do. And if you work in an organization that has inside counsel, don't expect them to be able to give you a quick answer. This is difficult stuff from a legal, regulatory, and compliance perspective. Now, having said that, there are ways forward. And if you, as an organization, think deliberately and carefully about these issues, you'll come up with a strategy that is going to work for you. Will it be foolproof? No. But it will get you to where you need to be. But the first step in making sure that that happens is recognizing that the legal and regulatory environment in other jurisdictions may not operate the same way it does in the United States, and you're going to have to really think differently about those issues.
Dr. David Burt from UVA, Mr. Dale Vandemark from McDermott, Will & Emery, please join me in thanking them for sharing their expertise with us.